welcome to Upfront. I am Kang Tae-ri. We saw a number of diplomatic and security-related issues globally last year, including the growing threat of the Islamic State militant group, an Ebola outbreak in West Africa, and continued provocations out of North Korea. On today's Upfront, we assess various security issues of 2014 and look ahead to the issues that could emerge in 2015. And of course, we are joined by a great panel of experts on these issues. First up, to my left, we are joined by Ambassador Chun, a former National Security Advisor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
And to my right, Professor Park In-hee from Ewha Women's University. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for inviting me.
And of course, Mr. Ri Jong-soo, co-president of the Sustainable Development Global Network. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Now let's warm up here a little bit. What do you think was the hottest diplomatic and security issue of 2014? Maybe I will start off with you, Ambassador.
I think the biggest issue is Russia's encroachment on Crimea and maybe on Ukraine, because this is considered as direct challenge to the post-Cold War order, which has lasted for more than 2 decades. So this is a fundamental change in the geopolitics of Europe and the world as well. So if you want me to single out an event that has long-term structural impact on the, international relations in general, I would define this Russia's invasion of Crimea, annexation of Crimea, as a starting point that we should watch out.
Exactly. I mean, we were supposed to warm up here, but we just had so many issues globally this past year. Now, before we go any deeper, let's take a look at the diplomatic and security-related issues that our program Upfront has covered over the past year, while also looking ahead to the coming year.
Continued controversies surrounding North Korea, rise of multilateral diplomacy, tense relations and repeated conflicts between South Korea, China, and Japan. We take an overall view of the diplomatic and security issues that dominated 2014. As North Korea has always been at the center of the diplomatic and security issues, it's been one of the most talked about issues on Upfront. It's been discussed 8 times over the past year, most recently in December, over legislation of the North Korean Human Rights Act. Among the North Korea-related issues that Upfront has covered, there has been the possibility of unification on the Korean peninsula, the roles of North Korean defectors for achieving unification, the possibility of globalizing the Kaesong industrial complex, North Korean human rights, changes in North Korea-Japan relations, establishing a DMZ World Peace Park, the generational shift within North Korea, and legislation of the North Korean Human Rights Act. The dynamics within Northeast Asia have fluctuated over the past year, along with multiple meetings between the heads of states. Multilateral diplomacy has risen as a new trend, and as part of it, the ASEAN-Korea Commemorative Summit was recently held in Busan. It was the first multilateral diplomatic meeting under the Park Geun-hye administration. And also in November, a lot of multilateral summits took place, including the APEC, ASEAN Plus 3, East Asia, and G20 summits. Aside from the rise of multilateral diplomacy, President Park Geun-hye, in a speech to the UN General Assembly, urged the international community to give more support for climate change issues and the North Korean human rights issue. Lastly, one of the hottest diplomatic and security issues was trilateral relations among Korea, China, and Japan. The 3 countries remain mired in historical disputes, including the Japanese wartime sexual enslavement issue and territorial disputes. Korea and China have been planning to take a stronger stance against Japan to prompt change. The tensions have intensified since Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe took office. Abe has announced his will to exercise the right to collective self-defense as part of the administration's right-wing shift. Japan also made moves to re-examine the Kono Statement, which has escalated tensions between Korea and Japan, as well as China and Japan. A lot of different diplomatic and security issues have drawn the world's attention over the past year. And another issue also made a lot of headlines at the beginning of 2015. In their New Year's messages, the leaders of both Koreas mentioned the possibility of summit talks, which has raised hopes of cross-border relations making a huge step forward. On January 2nd, U.S. President Barack Obama signed an executive order imposing new sanctions against North Korea in retaliation for its suspected role in a hacking attack on Sony Pictures, distributor of the film The Interview, which centers on a CIA plot to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This coming August, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will deliver a statement on the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. Attention will be on what he says and the reactions out of Korea and China. Along with the diplomatic and security issues, all eyes are on how the dynamics in Northeast Asia will play out in 2015.
So let's talk North Korea first. I mean, it only makes sense that way, right? So let's talk about what do you think will be the risk factor or an opportunity or some sort of event that will set the tone for diplomacy between the two Koreas in 2015?
I think risk factor far outweighs other factors, stability factors. So I think much will depend on the choices that Kim Jong-un will make and has made.
Okay. All right. Professor Park, you want to elaborate?
Yes. Regarding North Korea's external behavior, if you take a look at for the previous cases, it was not only the reflection of the outside threat according to their interpretation, but also the many part, a significant part of their behavior, is a reflection of their domestic politics as well. So people say that, after the 3 years period of the, after death of the Kim Jong-il, they did their best to stabilize their domestic issues and their own, the internal stability. And then after 3 years, in particular, 3 years means something special to many Korean people, even including the North Korea. And they try to expand their new leadership of Kim Jong-un and influence outside of North Korea. So in that sense, they will make a quite interesting step toward not only South Korea to go the Korea, but also China and Russia as well. In particular, if you think about one of the key policymakers' visit to Russia sometime end of last year, I will assume or expect quite dynamic, both bilateral and multilateral diplomatic competition in Northeast Asian region.
It seems that the South Korean government is eager to work with North Korea. It already that the president as well as the Minister of Unification mentioned that we would ease off the May 24th the measures, also how to reconnect the inter-Korean relationship.
So let's stay with that idea and talk about Kim Jong-un's leadership for a minute. There were doubts in the beginning, we have to say, about whether he will be able to, have that firm grip on power. How do you assess his leadership so far with 3 years?
Well, there's no doubt that Kim Jong-un is more reckless, more ruthless enough to execute his own uncle. Reckless enough to defy China's advice for restraint when it comes to nuclear testing, missile launches. And he's more dangerous than his late father. There's no doubt about that. But I would caution against underestimating his capability to rule North Korea. I think in less than 3 years, he has now a firm grip on the reins of power. He learned how to tame the military, even if he keeps giving lip service to the military first policy. I think he's more focused on economic development. And he has been more audacious in opening up the country and in going about economic reforms. He doesn't want to call it reforms or openness, but I think he has done a lot in terms of the ways he manages North Korean economy. He has been, courageous enough to send more than, I think, 100,000 North Korean workers overseas to earn hard currency. These are not the things that his father could easily do.
That's true.
So I think on the surface, it's more or less stable. But because of frequent reshuffles in the top leadership, the military leadership, I think there is a mounting anxiety in the ruling circles that will be a factor of instability in the future, in the longer term. But for now, up to now, I think he has outmaneuvered, outsmarted many of those top leaders who may have been inclined to underestimate Kim Jong-un, including his own uncle who was executed. Right. So those who thought this is a young guy who doesn't have experience to rule, he doesn't know how to rule the country, but they proved wrong. And I think they suffered because of their wrong, judgment about the skills of Kim Jong-un to rule the country. So I think thus far, I wouldn't underestimate his performance. Okay. But we have to, when we look forward to the future, I think there is a brewing anxiety, uneasiness in the power circles. I don't know how that will explode in the future, but depending on how Kim Jong-un, deals with that kind of uneasiness and anxiety, instability in the leadership.
All right. Now, in terms of the news flow, it seems to agree with you, although the rationale is different. Let's take a look at a news article here, if we may, on my back here. I mean, not just one, but a couple of them that we pulled out. And some of them says, okay, the headline goes, North Korea readies for war, declares 2015 unification year. And we also have others saying North Korea enhancing Army's winter training, increasing artillery training. So with North Korea declaring 2015 as the year of unification, are we looking at more military clashes between the two countries? Or
I have already answered your question.
Exactly,
but,
yes.
I wouldn't I wouldn't read too much into this rhetoric. For Kim Jong-un, if he believes it helps in his domestic politics, every year can be a year for unification. So 2015 is not I don't think he's really serious in. He would be lucky not to be unified.
Then with this kind of stall in the inter-Korean relations for such a long time, with the Park Geun-hye administration going into the third year this year, in its search for some kind of breakthrough with North Korea, do you think we can sort of sense a shift in its tone on the part of Seoul in 2015?
Without any positive gesture from North Korea, I don't think it is easy to dismantle so-called May 24 framework or any the friendly approaches to North Korea. So it kind of depends on quite depends on how we understand North Korea's behavior or gesture towards not only to South Korea, but also international community.
But then what about the recent comment from South Korea's unification minister, the point man on inter-Korean relations, saying, yes, we can talk about lifting sanctions, possibly. We can talk about more reunions between separated families. Let's talk. Is that a shift in tone?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But what I can tell you is that North Korea needs inter-Korean relations, better inter-Korean relations, more than the ROK does. Because North Korea, in their survival strategy, they have a lot to gain from better inter-Korean relations. And without improvement in inter-Korean relations, the life of North Korean people and North Korean regime will become more difficult. So I understand that they desperately need better inter-Korean relations. They may be interested in dialogue, and they may come up with a peace offensive, a charm offensive again. But from the ROK side, from the South, we don't have to depend on North Korea for survival, economic prosperity. All we want from them is not to do harm to us, not to destroy peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Now, we are talking about the 2015 outlook for the inter-Korean relations and the dynamics surrounding the Korean Peninsula. Now, stretching this conversation a bit, let's bring in the U.S. policy. Upfront had a chance to meet Thomas Fingar, a Stanford academic, as well as a former deputy director of national intelligence for analysis, to hear more about the U.S. policy toward North Korea in 2015.
Well, I don't see prospects for much change in U.S. policy towards the DPRK in the coming year. That I think Washington is about out of ideas. So if there's to be initiatives, the initiatives would have to come from Seoul, and I think Washington is predisposed to follow the lead, to support our ally and partner, to support President Park in anything that she wishes to undertake. Well, I believe that the strong position the United States has taken in objecting to North Korea's nuclear weapons program is the right policy and should continue. Denuclearization is probably a long-term aspiration, and I think the focus should be more on preventing short-term proliferation of nuclear technologies, development of miniaturized weapons through more testing, and development of longer range delivery capabilities through the missile program. So a moratorium on missile testing, a moratorium on testing of nuclear weapons, and discussions, negotiations, institution building to prevent the proliferation of nuclear materials and know-how should be the focus.
All right, that was Mr. Thomas Fingar from the National Intelligence for Analysis. So he's not much of an optimist when it comes to some sort of breakthrough with North Korea when it comes to 2015. Now, speaking of Washington, and that's probably the reason why we had to delay the OPCON transfer, the wartime operational control to South Korea this past year. What does this mean? What does this another delay mean? Is this a sigh of relief for South Korea, and is that it?
Whenever we had a kind of new agreement or decision, it is kind of very serious political debate, and sometimes we had a pressure from the civilian part, including South Korean NGOs and etc. But this time I personally expected to publicize the decision to delay the OPCON. I quite expected a serious political demand and pressure from the civilian sector. But interestingly enough, this time, I don't think so. I don't see such a big pressure from people outside the government. The way how I interpret one of the interesting consequences is that people in Korea, they try to separate or have two different criteria track. Something in terms of the ROK-US relations or alliance, and something in terms of North and South Korean relations. We have to think about the other fact. If something happened in this year within the name of the alliance partnership between US and Korea, whatever it is, could be atomic energy, new agreement or whatever, the Upcon issue easily gives some kind of negative spillover effect to another issue. So it's a very delicate issue. That means, South Korean leadership or policymakers should be very sensitive or careful about handling the public opinion.
So you're warning of far-reaching implications of this delay than we usually think. Now, so I guess neither of you is a big fan of this idea of installing U.S. missile defense system then, am I right? The THAAD system. What's your stance on this idea?
U.S. missile defense system.
Exactly.
Is deploying in Korea. Well, it depends on whether U.S. needs new missile defense system to against North Korean nuclear threats, missile and nuclear threats. They have a lower tier missile defense system now, PAC-3 system. But given that North Korea is more likely to mount their nuclear devices, explosive devices on longer range Nodong missiles, which would fly higher and faster.
Yes.
I think a higher tier missile defense system is necessary. The question is whether we can have, or U.S. if there's a U.S. missile defense system, ROK missile defense. If you are talking about U.S. missile defense, it's up to U.S. decision. What they need to defend their own troops, their own military installations in Korea. But more than U.S., the ROK is in more dire need of missile defense system. Okay. But we are more complacent than Americans about protecting the lives and safety of 50 million Korean people than 30,000 American troops. I think the whole discourse about missile defense system is misguided now. It's misled by those who do not really understand how the missile defense system works. What it does in defending ourselves or U.S. troops in Korea against North Korean missile and nuclear. Conventional missiles are not a big problem. The problem rises because North Korea may have now downsized their nuclear devices to fit on their missiles. And all North Korean missiles should be considered as potentially armed with nuclear weapons. That's the problem.
But so some are saying
that leaves us no margin of error in our national defense strategy.
Some are saying, though, South Korea needs to be mindful of what China might think about this whole thing. So how do we advise the South Korean government to maneuver this with the U.S. and China with the THAAD system?
Well, military decision, in many cases, military decision or technical issue, sometimes they have very interesting political implications. So even though we try to minimize the meaning of the THAAD system in terms of the military action or just security protection against any possible option from North Korea, again, it could develop diplomatic problem between U.S. and China, and also partly Korea and China. But again, as Ambassador Chan mentioned, I think we have kind of our own full degree of authority to make a decision whether we finalize the THAAD system or not. One thing we have to think about that regarding that issue is that, in particular, as you mentioned, the China issue. Many cases, China's government, China's perspective regarding the Korean Peninsula issue, not only in terms of the China-Korea relation, but also in many cases they try to interpret something happening in the Korean Peninsula within the larger picture, which is, say, the U.S. relation. So third issue, it could be a typical example. So they may give some, bigger interpretation. Could be, the future liability between competition between U.S. and China, and it could undermine China's military capability, or etc. So they have some, difficult situations, etc. So, well, it's kind of their diplomatic behavior or gesture. So we just try to keep within our own track, and we have our own full authority, and also obviously whenever we have a chance to meet them, try to explain the very specific meaning of the system, and in terms of importance of the security condition of South Korea, etc.
We've discussed the U.S.-China relations as well as issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula. At this point, let's delve into trilateral relations between South Korea, China, and Japan now. Let's first take a look at this next report on the biggest challenges facing the three-way diplomacy.
Trilateral relations among Korea, China, and Japan have strained over the past year amid territorial and historical disputes. Korea-Japan relations have hit a low point. After failing to come to terms on historical disputes, most notably the wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The two countries held a vice foreign ministers meeting to improve bilateral relations, but still couldn't narrow the gap. This year marks the 50th anniversary of Korea-Japan diplomatic ties. So attention is on the outlook of Seoul-Tokyo relations, especially following Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's landslide victory in a recent snap election. China, also undergoing diplomatic conflicts with Japan, has promoted cooperation with Korea. During their summit in Seoul, China suggested boosting bilateral ties against Japan, commemorating the 70th anniversary of the victory in China's war against Japan, and celebrating the liberation of the Korean Peninsula from Japanese colonial rule. Along with the settlement of the Korea-China FTA, bilateral ties are expected to be strengthened. However, China has agreed to boost its ties with Japan by tackling the historical disputes, which has pushed relations between the three countries into a new phase. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe finally met on the sidelines of the recent APEC summit in Beijing. However, not long after that, the two countries were at odds again over territorial disputes.
全く変わっておりません。这个4点原则共识是推动中日关系走向改善的重要条件。那么当前呢，这个重要的是要切实的得到遵循。
Beijing has raised concerns over the military pact signed by Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington last month that allows them to more easily share sensitive information on North Korea. It is because this might also imply an enhanced strategy to keep Beijing in check. Diplomatic relations among Korea, China, and Japan have fluctuated over the past year. What kind of changes will take place this year?
So let's rewind just a little bit to November 2014, and we go to Myanmar, where the ASEAN Plus 3 summit is being held, and the South Korean president suggesting a three-way summit with China and Japan. Quite a shift in tone. People in the media were having a field day on that. What's your forecast? Are we too ambitious?
Well, regarding the possibility of the three-way summit between Korea, China, and Japan, if you take a close look at what's going on in Northeast Asian region, we realize that there are two different realities. The first reality, the first regional structure under the name of the political and security condition. The second regional structure is under the name of the economic and social, condition. The first area, mistrust, gap of the confidence between among the three countries, and territorial issue, and all the difficult diplomatic condition. Ironically enough, if you take a look at the second structure, the second region, economic invisible integration between three countries, and obviously including the recent FTA agreement between China and Korea. Even, under the current diplomatic difficulties between Korea and Japan, we are quite, interrelated in a serious way. According to President Park Geun-hye's expression, she clearly mentioned that this is kind of, Asian paradox. So we have to make some positive, bringing spillover effect from the second reality to the first reality. It is very interesting happenings in occasion. So not only South Korean government, I personally understand, each state political leaders, they do understand the importance of the trust building in a political and security way, based on interesting economic and social integration among those three countries. But again, we have very sensitive issues. If we focused on the current Korean administration's regional policy, we has already passed 2 years under the name of the trust building in Northeast Asian region. So middle of the 2015, kind of very interesting, middle of the 5-year term. It's quite hard to expect whether we have the three-way summit or not. But considering all the situation 70 years after the end of the colonial period, in 1945, and again, possibly, but simultaneously, the recent Japanese election and Xi Jinping's very unique approaches to Japan, etc. I would say that 50% of the possibility of the yes, right, three-way summit, yes.
Well, I think trilateral summit it seems to be difficult to be held. Then another option is to have a ministers meeting. Then is that also the topics and subject what we need to discuss? Do you think? I mean, one way that is option, but in near term, is that the tangible possibility it can be realized in the near future?
Foreign ministers meeting should not be a big deal. They should be, unless they are at war, they should be able to meet, anytime. They should be able to call each other anytime. And we always have ups and downs in bilateral relationships among the three countries for thousands of years.
Right.
That should be taken for granted. But that shouldn't be an excuse for avoiding any dialogue among the three countries.
Well, if you take a look at the previous European case or some other regions, the multilateral discussion and cooperation, instead of the so-called issues within the high politics, such as security or political issues, we may approach it to human security issues, such as environmental issue or disaster or nuclear security, etc. So something which is, not that much sensitive, having political significance. So it could be another interesting, efficient, direct way to approach. Firstly, having foreign ministers meeting, for instance.
All right, and we are going to continue talking about the three-way diplomacy between South Korea, China, and Japan, and we are going to get another view on this topic outside of this studio to hear different opinions on this three-way diplomacy. We are joined by Professor Suzuki Yuji of Hosei University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today. My first question for you: some say what Japan is doing or not doing to its neighbors to make them not happy may put the U.S. in a more of a frustrated position, and that can eventually cool the Washington-Tokyo relations. Do you agree with them?
Japan and the Abe government faced two serious issues with the United States. One related to the agreement that needed to be reached between two countries for the promotion of the further devaluation process in the Pacific region. And a negotiation between Japan and the United States, two countries most important within the framework of Trans-Pacific sort of partnership treaty negotiations. And I think many had very, very strong domestic sort of oppositions against the agreement or the higher level of free trade agreement through Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty.
Then with South Korea and China being at odds with Japan over historical disputes, most notably the wartime sexual enslavement issue, what do you think would be the best way to deal with this issue and see some sort of a breakthrough?
Japan, China, and Korea are very different from the nations in Southeast Asia where they have more regional sort of arrangement securities, and they are moving to the building of new security architecture in that region. Japan, China, Korea having many difficult times, not only today, for many, many, many decades, we suffer various sort of conflicts, disputes, and so on. Yet, social relations or people's relations among three are tremendously deep and very strong, as if European sort of relations of one country to another. We understand each other, we share many cultures, we know each other very well through the various channels. We need to strengthen these trilateral working relationship, not only government level, but also society and society.
All right, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much, Professor Suzuki Yuji. Now, so Japan seems to be the variable in the three-way diplomacy, and let's go back to last month with Shinzo Abe winning a landslide victory in a snap election. Does this mean that his right-wing policies are getting a nice boost and him doing things his way when it comes to these historical and territorial issues with China and South Korea?
I'm not sure, but I know that he gained more seats. But if you look at the specifics,
right,
I see no ground that there was an overwhelming support for, or stronger support for Abe's revisionist approach to history, or the major foreign policy lines that he has been following. So I see no ground to believe that there will be a fundamental change, or a qualitative change in Abe administration's foreign policies, national security policy.
All right. What about you, Professor?
And also, most importantly, even though we try to explain or interpret their behavior in terms of quite, right-wing conservatism or approaches, but simultaneously, according to their way of understanding, they try to explain they are doing some kind of normalization or a normal behavior, partly because of their previous Cold War uncertain condition. At the same time, another factor to understand Japanese external or foreign policy is that external behavior is that what is the American government position regarding, again, as you mentioned before, what is the influence of so-called U.S.-Japan alliance partnership?
Right.
As long as they understand United States, they need Japan, which is a very relatively reliable and critical partner in the whole Asian region, and also partly policymakers in this area, they understand somehow Japan is the only player in the region to face the rise of China. So within that circumstance, they quite continue. The Abe will continue their unique leadership, which is quite, right-wing side.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, we've seen a couple of U.S. lawmakers in Washington sort of going against Washington's policy to keep these sensitive issues at bay, and we are not getting involved. But there are lawmakers, American lawmakers, who are voicing their strong opinions. For example, Ed Royce has retained his position as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and claiming that Dokdo is the proper name for South Korea's, easternmost islands. Do you think stories like this could somehow impact the three-way relations along with Washington?
No, I don't think so.
Not strong enough.
Dokdo is not about naming. Dokdo is a sovereignty issue, it's a territorial issue.
Okay.
So whether somebody or a senior person in Washington calls it Dokdo or not, calling Dokdo is just a sensible thing to do. It doesn't mean that he's favorably inclined toward, the central issue, the substantive issue of Dokdo, territorial issue. And I don't think any American leaders will take a position on Dokdo. They don't want to get involved in quarrels between their friends, the East Asian friends. So calling a name as those who have a jurisdiction on the territory call it. That's the standard and sensible way of calling it. So I wouldn't give more meaning to than that to what Mr. Royce may have said.
We need to understand the American politicians' behavior and the tendency. The congressmen, their constituents are many Asians, and also the rhetoric related to the Korean or Japan issue is pretty much serving their constituents. So therefore, what they say really not translated into real policy.
But don't you think that for an American lawmaker to come out and say it publicly, despite the U.S.-Japan relations, it must have been not an easy decision.
The fundamental difference between East Sea and Dokdo is that East Sea is a naming issue. How Americans call East Sea, whether they call it Sea of Japan or that's the central issue. But Dokdo is, even if you call it Lianggur, as long as you recognize the sovereignty of the ROK, it's not a big issue. It's not a big deal. Lianggur used to be the internationally recognized name for Dokdo, but we don't have to protest just because somebody calls it Lianggur. We call it Dokdo. So, different countries have different names for other countries' names, even provinces, cities. China calls Seoul, by different name, but we don't protest every time.
All right.
China doesn't use Seoul, call Seoul as Seoul. So this is not the central issue.
All right. So what's in a name and not much meaning that you say. Now, South Korea and Japan have been embroiled in tension, to say the least, for some time now. To hear more about the reasons behind, meet Professor T.J. Pempo from UC Berkeley.
The current Japanese leadership is firmly convinced that the rise of China will be a negative factor in the region, that the rise of China will come at Japan's expense. I think Japan was very comfortable for 25 or 30 years being the #1 player in East Asia and contributing greatly to the economic miracle in East Asia. Suddenly now China has seized the initiative and seems to be the country that every other country in the region wants somehow to be connected to. And I think this has a negative effect on the thinking within Japan's diplomatic community. But the danger, I think, is that Japan is moving in the direction of creating a bifurcation or a serious division between China and Japan, and trying to exacerbate a tension between China and the United States. My fear is that as Japan moves toward a continued reinterpretation of its history during the 1920s and 1930s, if and when Prime Minister Abe continues visits to Yasukuni Shrine, that this will have a very negative effect on relations with both China and with Korea. And I think it'll have a very negative effect on U.S.-Japan relations.
All right, so looking ahead to the new year 2015, what would be some of the events that could pose risks or bring opportunities to the Northeast Asian dynamics or South Korea?
From the regional perspectives in those East Asian region, again, whether we have a interesting chance, whether we have interesting chance to handle or to overcome the previous sensitive diplomatic condition between Korea and Japan and China and Japan, etc. So people always say that 7 years after 1945 and etc. 7 years of the beginning of the mainland China, etc. So
Right.
Whether we have a chance again, whatever it is, three-way summit or three countries minister meetings, whatever it is. Anyway, it is a critical point to perspective to see we are harmonized all the issues. And secondly, again, North Korea, it seems to me for the last 3 years, condolence period after death of the Kim Jong-il, I think they are ready to make a dynamic gesture or a political diplomatic step towards China or Russia, etc. So probably we have new intercolonial relation or new diplomatic condition to handle North Korea's behavior. Also in the same line after the the human rights condition of North Korean regime. And finally, U.S. is a critical player as well regarding the Korean issue. But after the November election, I don't think Obama's administration will have an easier chance to make an interesting step toward North Korea or to fundamentally dismantle the nuclear issue. So U.S. still continue to support South Korean position in terms of our approaches to North Korea. And yeah, those are some key pointers to viewing the diplomatic condition of 2015.
All right. What kind of year do you think 2015?
I basically agree with Professor Park. I think the biggest event to watch is how Korea-Japan relations evolve in the year 2015, because this is 50th anniversary of the normalization of relations between our two countries, and how we get China or Japan to come to terms with its own past, how we resolve the most sticky issues that stand in the way of Korea-Japan relations. That will have not only far-reaching implications for Korea-Japan relations, but Korea-U.S. alliance, also the geopolitics of Northeast Asia. So we know that there's a lot of concerns about Abe's landslide victory in parliamentary elections, and there is a pessimism about the chance of his changing his policy. But I think a strong leader in Japan has political capital to make bold decisions. So I'm basically pessimistic, but only a strong leader with a strong public support like Abe or Tanaka, Koizumi, these people, these are not popular in Korea, but they are the ones who can make decisions if they are ready to sacrifice 5–10% of their approval rating. They can do that. But weak leaders, they cannot sacrifice even 1% of their popular, approval rating just to improve relations between our two countries. But Abe, if he makes up his mind, I think he has a leadership to fundamentally change Korea-Japan relationship at this very meaningful anniversary of Korea-Japan relations. So, while I would bet against that kind of possibility, let's keep our fingers crossed for a breakthrough, a significant breakthrough in Korea-Japan relations. Regarding North Korea, I think it depends on whether Kim Jong-un makes a strategic decision to abandon its nuclear ambition, nuclear programs, once and for all. That's tall order, and nobody will expect such a miracle. But short of that decision, I don't think there will be a fundamental change in relationship between North Korea and outside the world, including inter-Korean relations. We'll be happy if he doesn't resort to new provocations, new nuclear, testing or long-range missile tests. That's all we would, expect from North Korea. But we should also be prepared for a peace offensive that North Korea will come up with. I think that's more likely than a serious military provocation.
Okay. All right.
Unless there is a domestic political trouble that he has to deal with through outside, confrontation with the outside world.
Now, we've had quite a run for this past hour, and we talked about a lot about uncertainties and pessimism and a lot of staying with the status quo. Any word of advice for the South Korean government to wrap up this conversation? Maybe I want to start off with you, Professor Park.
Okay, actually, which is Ambassador Chun's area, but okay. One of the key questions whenever we have the perspective of the Korean government, the way how to keep well-balanced position between U.S. and China. In the year 2015, I would say that the rivalry between U.S. and China, the rivalry is not that much appropriate term, but anyway, the competition between the two countries will be deeper than before. So, because of the unique geographic condition, geopolitical condition of the Korean peninsula, South Korean government may have more difficult in a position the way how to keep, the well-balanced position between the two countries. Right. So, in particular, considering North Korean issue, in particular, the South issue, etc. So, that is one of the key questions. Secondly, I think Park Geun-hye administration has quite friendly diplomatic condition in terms of supporting her North Korean policy from both U.S. and China. So, for the last 2 years, officially, U.S. government and Chinese government, they, have supported our position under the name of trust-building process between the two Koreas. So, once we have such kind of friendly support from both two key players, I think we need to take more strong initiative or more aggressive gesture towards North Korea, whatever it is. So, that is another critical factor that we have to handle.
All right.
I have 3 advices.
Okay.
One is to distinguish between what is ideal and what is achievable, a realistic goal. Secondly, future should not be held hostage to the past. Thirdly, national interest, vital national interest should not be allowed to be defeated by public sentiment or populism. That's all I want to
All right, I took notes.
say.
Realistic, future-oriented, and protect your national interest. I'm going to wrap this up for now, but thank you so much, all 3 of you, for coming into our studio today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, our viewers, for joining us today as well. Until next time, stay with us online and tell us what you think. Bye-bye.